We are ready when you are. Then okay, good morning again, and thank you for honoring our invitation to this news conference. My name is Andrew Karamaji. I'm a lawyer. I work in Zimbabwe and South Africa, but I'm a member also of the fraternity of civil society organizations in Uganda. I'm joined by my colleagues who will introduce themselves shortly, Sarah Birete and Sarah Mukasa. And this press conference, it's important to say, is being held at a unique time when dozens of organizations have had their bank accounts, that's institutional bank accounts, as well as individual or personal bank accounts frozen for over 5 months now. This press conference is also being held under a climate of fear and intimidation. Indeed, you can see that the turn-up reflects that fear that has been sowed amongst our colleagues and the sector as a whole, so that people are afraid of being arrested or further prosecuted in the ways that we've seen over the past several weeks and months. Before I read the statement, I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, then I'll proceed with the reading, and we will thereafter render the same in Luganda. Over to you, Sarah.
Good morning, members of the media. Sarah Birete, Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. I want to re-echo concerns of fear and panic in the sector, which you have all witnessed by the very poor turn-up in this room, even when colleagues had confirmed. The sector can simply be described as hiding under the bed. I will add on to that comment. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the press. My name is Sarah Mukasa. I have been in civil society for over 20 years, working in the field of gender justice and women's rights. Thank you all for coming.
Copies of this statement will be availed to you. So I'm going to read verbatim. For immediate release, the title is NGOs are not terrorist organizations. We, Ugandan civil society organizations and as concerned citizens, issue this statement to dispel the surge of systematic, negative and harmful government narratives, threats and illegal actions that are all geared towards closing the space for civic engagement in Uganda. Civil society organizations and NGOs are an indispensable component of the socio-economic and political fabric of our polity. Our existence is not only mandated by the Constitution, but is also borne out by the history of struggle for self-determination. From providing essential services to promoting accountable governance, NGOs are an indispensable component in a developing society that lacks adequate government presence. However, we are currently witnessing an unprecedented and hostile campaign by the state to dismantle this sector. This statement serves as a formal communication against the unfounded and deliberately misleading narrative painted by the ruling political establishment, which baselessly labels NGOs as agents of shadowy foreign interests and threats to national security. We assert that the prevalence of NGOs is not a threat, but rather an indictment of the government's failure to meet its obligations under the social contract. Statements of fact are a pattern of hostility. The Ugandan government has transitioned from defamatory rhetoric into aggressive administrative and the use of lawfare, characterized by a clear and regressive pattern that coincides with the ongoing political transition. The following points are important to note. 1. Political blackmail and timing. We are mindful that this crackdown follows a historical pattern of state overreach during the political season, right from the 2017 raids on ActionAid, GLIS, and the Hur Institute during the presidential age limit debate, to the 2021 arbitrary suspension of 54 organizations. The current assault on the eve of and in the aftermath of the 2026 general elections is a concerted effort to silence civic engagement on salient governance challenges like corruption, human rights violations, and flawed elections. 2. Regulatory vacuum and recent suspensions. Following the NGO Amendment Act of 2024, the NGO Bureau was dissolved as an independent body and absorbed into the Ministry of Internal Affairs. This has left the sector under an unconstituted authority, leading to the recent arbitrary suspension of 10 organizations in complete disregard for due process. 3. Administrative overreach. There is an ongoing weaponization of the Financial Intelligence Authority and the Uganda Bankers Association to freeze bank accounts. Despite 3 High Court rulings, including those by Justice Esther Nambayo and Justice Jovia Kavuma, stating that the FIA cannot freeze accounts indefinitely without presenting evidence of a crime to court, this administrative overreach amounts to contempt of court. Moreover, the UBA has also issued instructions to banks to freeze accounts of NGOs in spite of the fact that it has no regulatory mandate. Restrictive legislation. As if the ongoing excesses are not enough, the ongoing regulatory impact assessment seeks to create a state-controlled NGO fund to dictate funding, claiming that NGOs access regular or bad money. This is a direct attempt to seize control of development aid, despite the fact that NGO sources are the same as those accepted by the government of Uganda for its own programs and budget support. The following are the consequences of this repression. Service delivery deficits. Millions of Ugandans who rely on NGOs for healthcare, education, and legal aid are left behind when the state fails to deliver and then shuts down those who do. 2. Erosion of democracy. By labeling civic monitoring as subversive, the state is removing the independent eyes and watchdogs necessary for transparent democratic governance. 3. Economic instability. Arbitrary suspensions and the freezing of funds undermine the national economy as the sector is a major employer and source of foreign exchange. 4. Climate of fear. Working in an NGO does not strip a citizen of their sovereign rights. The criminalization of dissent makes no citizen, journalist, or lawyer safe from state overreach. And the following are the calls to action. We demand, 1, immediate reversal of suspensions and illegal orders. We demand the immediate reinstatement of the permits of the suspended organizations and the unfreezing of all affected bank accounts. 2, withdrawal of repressive proposals, i.e. halt the regulatory impact assessment proposals that seek to control funding and donor accreditation and ensure meaningful input by the sector and all relevant stakeholders. 3, protection of constitutional rights. Government must respect Articles 29 and 38 of the Constitution, which guarantee the rights to association, expression, and participation in governance. And finally, cessation of hostility. We call upon the political establishment to stop the defamatory rhetoric and recognize that a thriving civil society is a shield for the citizen, not a threat to the state. Instead, government should be more open to partnership with civil society in pursuit of a shared national development vision. The statement concludes that we remain committed to our mission and will continue to challenge the injustices on the sector through every legal and moral avenue available. We've said these things for God and our country. We will now, unless you want it otherwise, have my colleagues address you as well. Then we will render the statement in Luganda.
I will further speak to the legal framework and mandate of civil society organizations. When you go to our constitution, Article 1, everybody knows Article 1 at least, power belongs to the people, who shall exercise it through participation in their governance. Of course, that article has provisions on the elections as well as other aspects of participation. In the constitution, like Andrew has cited, we still have the democratic principles under the directives and objectives of state policy. Objectives 5 and 6 under democratic principles are about the liberty of citizens to participate in their governance through either civil and political organizations. And under 6, civil society organizations shall retain autonomy in the pursuit of their objectives. The state is now struggling with this autonomy of NGOs. I'm sure some of you have even heard about a draconian bill on NGO funding by a state which has a skyrocketing public debt. Now, because of the struggle with autonomy of NGOs, is posturing that they want to fund NGOs when they cannot fund teachers, when they cannot fund medicine in hospitals, when they cannot pay their own bills. We still have 70%, no 50% donor funded of our budget. But because of control and the struggle for autonomy of NGOs, now they are there debating on how to find money for NGOs. I'm sure most of you know the skyrocketing public debt in this country. We have Article 38, of course, under the Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, which provides for citizens' rights to form and participate in civic organizations, including NGOs. When you go beyond the Constitution, we have Chapter 5 of the African Charter on democracy, elections, and governance, which mandates African states to provide a conducive environment for civil society organizations and build a culture of democracy. The questions that media should ask, for example, when the Financial Intelligence Authority
says that they are tracing 70 billion belonging to two NGOs as an example, can you as media ask them to mention which organization has 70 billion in Uganda? Because I can assure you that it is not possible. I can assure you authoritatively that it is not possible, that it is fake news. Some of these state agencies are looking for operational budgets because of corruption. Others are buying, rice for promotions and favors. You need to ask the FIA to produce the transactions that has caused them, details of these transactions that has caused them to freeze accounts, and the reasons why. This is the role of media. When they mention, the regime has learned that whenever they mention security, then everybody runs away. Security concerns, how can NGOs which are monitored, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the bureaucratic nature of compliance with the NGO Bureau. Annually, you mention your sources of funding, you share audit reports, you share activity reports, you declare staff you employ on an annual basis. So what information would FIA be looking for that is not available at the NGO Bureau? What information? So my call is to the media to be more investigative. When the state comes up with such blanket statements, do you ask the questions? Do you ask evidence? And can you do so? Because this is in your mandate as media. And with the collapse of NGOs, like you have seen today, like Pastor Martin said, when they came for the Jews, I could not speak because I was not a Jew. I can assure you that after closure of media, of civil society, you will be next if you don't ask the hard questions. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I will not say much because my colleagues have said it all. I think mine is just to reiterate that we are all bound by the constitution of this country. Put it here. We're all bound by the constitution of this country. We all want to see this country doing well. The civil society sector that I know has done so much to support government, but also to support many, 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 many millions of Ugandans who have been excluded from one way or the other of taking part in the development of this country. I'm talking about women, I'm talking about children, right across the country, have done services, education, healthcare, many, 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 many other services, giving communities of Ugandans access to basic services. And so, as the statement have said, we see ourselves not as terrorists or as enemies of the development agenda of this country. We see ourselves as bound by the Constitution. So if there are any regulatory frameworks that are in place by government, we need to be in partnership to define this. We all need to be answerable to the Constitution. And this is the spirit in which we come to this conversation. Thank you so much.
answers are very good.
Thank you, Andrew, and the colleagues. I'm Ian Sukelo from Chief Reports. From your demand, they are both, but I have not seen you clearly stated there's a legal lacuna after the resolving of the NGO bill. I've not seen any demand asking for either the reinstatement or another legal provision to serve that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other?
Thank you very much. My name is Robert. My question is about the consequences of this step. Coming out of it, has been achieved by this government issues in terms of whether women, children, can you give us a breakdown of the bit of this in terms of community services and women's currently?
Sure.
Kenneth, their hands.
My name is Mike Sewell from the Daily Monitor. You mentioned about the state of fear, which has even hindered the attendance. How many civil society organizations are you invited? And so far we are seeing is could we have
My name is Farida from UGC. We talked about 5 months of this, what government is doing and other national organizations. We need to know whether you are putting some engagement, either government or with the NFI, and what are the outcomes of such an engagement.
Any more? Okay.
I wanted to invite Job to bring his chair closer. There are
Maybe just one. Can you expound a little bit on the issue of the government setting, putting in place a fund? The argument has been that donor funding is dwindling, and therefore the government recognizes the fact that NGOs are critical partners, so they need to create a line budget within the national budget, through which they can also supplement the little funding that will come from the donor. So that's the work of the NGOs in critical sectors can continue. Can you expound a little bit on your position on that proposal to put in place a fund where the government will be, in charge of the disbursement of the funds as per your requisition? They sort of appraise what you want to do and then agree on whether you deserve to get these funds or not. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I will just handle 2 questions and leave so that each of our colleagues, there are 6 questions. And we have been joined by Job Kija, but also there are other members of the NGO fraternity that have joined and are seated behind. So I will just handle the questions of the Bureau and how many NGOs were invited. And then I leave the other questions to my colleagues to handle. The NGO Amendment Act of 2024, which merged the original NGO Bureau back as a ministry department, provided for, first of all, redefined the Bureau. Under Section 16, the Bureau is defined as what was originally members of the board. So when you mention the NGO Bureau, it is the former board members of the NGO Bureau. And these people do not exist. What we have is a secretary of the bureau who is at the level of a commissioner in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The members who were originally known as members of the board, including Justice Chinobe as a chair, who is now a judge in High Court, and others, do not exist after the amendment. So when you go to the literal meaning of the NGO Amendment Act, the bureau does not exist. Even when we are engaged in negotiations, we are engaged in negotiations with the administrator of the bureau, not the bureau. The law required the minister to gazette members of the bureau. Nobody has ever seen this gazette. So legally, we have a non-existent NGO bureau. So when I was saying the media should ask the hard questions, the question should now be, who took a decision to suspend NGOs? Under the amendment, the secretary of the bureau has a function to communicate decisions of the bureau, meaning decisions taken by former board members, an equivalent of former board members. They don't exist. So who took a decision to suspend NGOs? Legally, nobody. And these are the questions we've been asking in boardrooms. I'm glad the public interest lawyers have come forward, including Law Society, Mike Aboneka, and others. So legally, you find that nobody qualifies to suspend NGOs in Uganda today until that gazette is out. I hope I've answered that question. So when Okelo asks, how come we are not demanding? Should the government be awakened to do their own duties? They amended the NGO Act of 2016 under the standard of the current leadership of the parliament. They refused us a hearing. And it will be unfortunate if they are re-elected. That's another debate. They refused us a hearing because the current speaker does not allow public participation during legal making processes. And you as media, you know that. So when I was saying media should be more investigative in nature, you need to help the public understand the governance crisis this country is in. And that's why civil society organizations are closed, because we keep reminding citizens of the governance crisis in this country. The government amended the laws, changed it, gave themselves duties which they have not performed. So when we are demanding for actions, I don't know whether we should maybe put a reminder to government that they should exist as government. Maybe that would be the action. And that's why we had left it out. The second question on how many were invited. We invited major NGOs working on governance, human rights, and accountability, because they are the most affected. We have about 8 in the room, 8 organizations represented in the room, and we invited about 30. Those who are suspended, like my organization, most of them are under the bed. If we speak, they will never reopen us. If we do what, that's the amount of intimidation in the sector. Of course, I don't need to remind people that I was prison number 1 of 2026. But I'll keep speaking. Thank you so much.
I'll hand over to my colleague, Job, so that he also speaks to. I believe you had the question.
Yeah, so I want to deal with one question, the question about the NGO fund. And I think for me, to understand the question of the NGO fund, we need to look at the spirit behind this whole proposal. First of all, this is not the first time that government is proposing an NGO fund. It was proposed in the 2015 amendment process, and it was rejected overwhelmingly. First of all, because the spirit behind it was not necessarily to facilitate the operations of the NGO sector, but it was rather to control and constrain the operations of the sector. And that is why the committee that was working on that law actually rejected that proposal, because it argued that, first of all, government is failing to finance its own budget. NGOs exist to fill up gaps that are left by the inefficiencies of government. So how can government claim that they can actually finance NGOs? The second argument was that government has a very bad track record in terms of accountability. So NGOs, I think at that time, were running what we call the Black Monday campaign. And that Black Monday campaign was exposing the corruption in government. So the team that was working on that law then argued that if NGOs really have these concerns about accountability in government, how can NGOs trust that if donors put money to finance their activities, this same government will not actually abuse those resources? And also donors actually had no trust in government. And I think for me, the corruption challenge that we had then has not improved. You can't say that government has become more transparent. They have in fact become worse. In terms of financing their own budget, you know it so well that government is more indebted now than it was 10 years back. Now, if you look at where they benchmarked to come up with this whole proposal of the NGO fund, they benchmarked on Ethiopia. If you look at Ethiopia, basically what they have done is to say any NGO that is receiving over 80% of its funding from external sources becomes a foreign organization. And in that regard, you cannot comment on matters to do with public life in the country. And that, I think, should really show you that the organizations which are being targeted, even from the suspension of the permits, that the investigations on the Financial Intelligence Authority, those are the organizations that are dealing with the teething accountability challenges that we have in this country. So those are the organizations that actually are targeted by the so-called NGO fund. If you look at the text of the regulatory impact assessment, they are not even saying we are going to put in place a fund, okay? They are talking about accreditation of donors, okay? That if a donor wants to finance NGOs in this country, they must first go to the government and get accredited. The second thing they are saying, if an NGO receives funding from a donor that is not accredited, you attract criminal sanctions. So clearly you can see that the whole spirit behind this idea of the NGO fund is not really to promote the growth or the functioning of civil society, but it is rather to constrain, to curtail, to decimate civil society. So there's nothing good in this proposal. And I think for me, all Ugandans actually need to unite behind civil society and reject this evil proposal that is being proposed by the NGO Bureau and the government. Thank you.
Okay, there was one more question regarding the which sought a breakdown of the effects that these suspensions have had, and I'll respond to it as follows. So our work is broad in terms of scope and coverage, and at the moment, affected areas or aspects include healthcare, both in terms of advocacy and service provision and monitoring, the natural resource governance. Some of the closed organizations specialize in monitoring how resources like petroleum are produced, developed, sold, and how they translate into public finance. The other critical area is agroecology and climate resilient practices. We support smallholder farmers across the country. Those are affected. Institutions whom I'm sure you know about that are close to you as the fourth estate, such as the Center for Media Excellence, that are engaging in media and related work are also affected. Education as well. And I've saved this final one because it's quite ironic but interesting to listen to. Local governments are also affected. How? In these areas where government presence is limited, the closest that the state has to deliver its services in terms of local district administrations, they partner with local NGOs. So if you've closed them, you're not only affecting NGOs individually, you are also impacting on your ability as a government to deliver on the social contract. And finally, this, as the lady, I think Farida from UBC said, yes, in our statement, we noted that it's been 5 months, but this does not begin 5 months ago. This has been a trend. We've talked about the raids on 6 organizations that happened in 2017. We've talked about the closure of a basket fund by the EU, referred to as the DGF, the Democratic Governance Facility. The harassment that is being faced by GIZ, the German foundation. So this does not date back to just a few months ago. It's a long pattern of related events. Unless there are any other comments from my colleagues.
My question was actually ending to how you manage to engage government and what are the outcomes of that engagement?
Okay, Sarah has led on that, so she will be in the best position to respond.
We have engaged government. I personally attended the meeting with our organization board representatives with the secretary of the bureau. And what he's trying to work on, I think until we see results, we can't tell whether it is successful or not. Many organizations have had similar meetings. Because as you are aware, the suspension of NGO activities was to prohibit. So we cannot call a public meeting unless it's convened by another entity that is not suspended. So these engagements are one-on-one. When the FIA news information came out, the board representatives also sought a meeting with the FIA, and they found that actually most of these actions, even some of the technocrats, I will not mention the officer who was in that meeting, but they seemed even not to understand what they were doing. They didn't even know what they were looking for. So they share vague letters like share your transactions, but our transactions are contained in audit reports that are available to the NGO Bureau. So what transactions are you looking for? And they couldn't tell the board representatives. So they said they will go back and review, see what they were looking for. And here we are with the frozen accounts. Section 19 of the FIA Act gives the FIA 48 hours to arbitrarily close any accounts in Uganda. Further closure should be with a court order. There is a constitutional court decision and 2 high court decisions to this effect, that FIA enjoys only administrative powers and cannot arbitrarily freeze an account in Uganda. 48 hours have since elapsed. So media should ask them.
What authority are they using to freeze accounts beyond operational 48 hours? And what are they looking for anyway? These are the questions that the media should raise. So we are engaging. But we also have a duty to inform the people we work with as a sector on what is happening to a sector. Because we have many concerns from people we work with. Many questions. And one of the purposes of this press conference is also to communicate to our beneficiaries out there. Thank you so much.
Uganda now. Is it working? Okay. Mwebale nnyo okujja ku lukuŋŋaana lwa bannamawulire lwe tuyise ng'ebitongole binnakyewa ebya Uganda nga tuzze wano okuvumirira enkola ya gavumenti ey'okutusiba amatu g'embuzi okutuliisa engo. Bibadde biyitiŋŋana buli kadde owulira nti ebitongole bino binnakyewa byenyigira mu bintu oba mu bikolwa ebisobola okuleeta obuzibu mu byokwerinda mu ggwanga lino. Ffe nga bino ebitongole tuzze okuwakanya ebyo ebyogerwa mu ngeri bw'etyo, ate nga ababyogera, gavumenti ebyogera terina bukakafu, ate nga n'embeera ebaddewo okuva ddala emyaka nga 10 egiyise nga bayita mu kuggalawo offices zaffe mwe tukolera, nga bateekako envumbo ku akawunti za bank ez'ebitongole bino, nga bakwata abantu ne batwala mu mbuga za kkooti awatali musango, ate eri ebitongole bino. Kale n'olwekyo bino bye twagala okuddamu mu mbeera eno gye twesanzeemu. Era ekiwandiiko kino tukiwadde omutwe ogugamba nti ebibiina bya nakyewa si bibiina by'abatujju. Emirimu gye tukola ekisooka giri mu ssemateeka. Obuwayiro 28, 29, 38 n'ekitundu ekya ssemateeka kye bayita National Objectives and Directive Principles of State Policy. Ekyo kisooka. Ekyokubiri, ebitongole bino biyamba ddala eyo mu byalo ebyetoolodde eggwanga mu nsonga z'ebyobulimi, Economic Authority. Ndowooza ekyo kibeera ekitongole ekiketta mu byensimbi. Awamu ne Uganda Bankers Association, ekitongole ekigatta banks eziri mu Uganda. Nga bino ebibiri bye bikutta kati mu kuggalawo bank accounts zaffe ez'obuntu n'ez'ebitongole nga tebalina bukakafu ate nga tebagoberedde mateeka agaliwo. N'ekintu ekibi kibalema okukola mu mateeka era bakikola bubi. Ebitongole bino Uganda Bankers Association ne Financial Intelligence Authority. Bino bye bivudde mu kunyigirizibwa kw'ebitongole bya nakyewa. Tulaba nga bwe njogedde nti empeereza oba enfuna ya service delivery mu byobulamu, mu byokusoma, mu legal aid katugiyite abatasobola kufuna abapleader ababawolereza mu kkooti, nga bino gye gimu ku mirimu gye tukola. Egyo emirimu gyonna gigootaanye. Okusaanyaawo mu nkola ya democracy kubanga eggwanga lino ssemateeka lituwa eddembe ery'okwenyigira mu ngeri eggwanga lino gye lifugibwa, obugagga bwaffe engeri gye bukozesebwa, kati okutuggalawo n'okusimbako envumbo zino eza bank accounts zireetera obuzibu mu nkola ya democracy. Ebitongole bino bigaba emirimu era bikozesa abantu abasukka si just kubakolera mu bitongole bino, wabula n'abo kati nga hoteeri eno abafuna ssente okuva mu mirimu gye tukola. So tosobola kutudismissinga nga totunulidde contribution yaffe naffe kitwongera ku kuzimba eggwanga mu mirimu gye tukola. Ekisembayo, ffe abakola mu bitongole bino tuli bannansi. Ekyokukola mu kitongole kinnakyewa tekinzijaako buvunaanyizibwa bwange oba eddembe ly'obwebange erimpeebwa constitution nti kati kubanga nkolera ekitongole NGO siina kwogera ku bintu bino ebigenda mu maaso mu ggwanga nga bye tubadde tulaba. Weewaawo twagala okusembayo nga tusaba nga tuvumirira era nga twagala bino bikolebwe mbagirawo. Ekisooka, envumbo zino eziteereddwawo ku bitongole bino ziggyibwewo era ebitongole bibeere nga bisobola okufuna ssente zaabyo okuva mu banks. Ekyokubiri, waliwo ekintu ekibadde kiteesebwako kye bayita bakitadde mu luzungu olukakkalye ennyo nga bakweka kye baagala okukola, bakiyita regulatory impact assessment. Muzungu agamba the devil is in the details. Kintu kiri awo tekitegeerekeka, ne bw'obuuza abaagala okukiyisaawo tebasobola kukinnyonnyola. Naye nga kino bwe mugenda okuva akateebe akagamba nti gavumenti eyagala yo eremeddwa okulabirira bannansi ate yo yeebeetuwa ssente, ate nga ffe tuli bibiina bya nnakyewa, ekyo kikome era tetugenda kikkiriza. Ekyokusatu, nga bwe njogedde, ssemateeka mu Buwaayiro 29 ne 38 etuwa ebbeetu eddembe ery'okwenyigira mu nfuga y'eggwanga, okukola bino awamu n'abalala, era n'okwogera, okuwandiika, okuyimba, okwekalakaasa mu ddembe. So zino rights zetulina zirina okuteebwamu ekitiibwa. Ekisembayo, twagala gavumenti eriwo efune ku nsonyi, erekeraawo okwogera kalebule eri ebitongole bya nnakyewa, wabula enoonye engeri gy'eteekawo enkolagana, kubanga ffenna tugoba kyekimu ekyokukulaakulanya nyaffe Uganda. Mwebale nnyo. Kati bano baba batuddemu.
Press conference eno n'ebibiina ebyanakyewa ebitalabiseeko ke kabonero akalaga nti obutiitiizi kati obuli mu sekita ebibiina bya nakyewa buyitiridde, tebali mu kweka wansi wa bitanda ku lwa intimidation n'ebikolwa gavumenti byezeekola mu bibiina bya nakyewa. Twayise ebitongole ebikola ku ensonga za governance, accountability, eddembe ly'obuntu, n'ebirala naye ebitongole 8 bye birabiseeko. Abalala bali mu kutya, tebaagala kwogera kubanga bamanyi bwe banaayogera mpozi bayinza okubagalirako ddala. Naye ate ffe ng'ebibiina bya nakyewa, ebibiina bino byateekerwawo okubeera eddoboozi ly'abantu. Kati bwe tunaaddamu kwekweka era ebibiina biba tebikyalina mugaso ku muntu wa bulijjo. Ekyokubiri, twayogeddeko ku nsonga ya NGO Bureau nti akakiiko akandibaddewo nga katambuza emirimu ya Bureau tekaliiwo. Minisita tanaaba kukateekako kubanga etteeka erikwata ku bibiina bya nakyewa baalikyusa mu rationalization nga bakendeeza ku bitongole ebibeerawo nga bikola emirimu gya gavumenti. Era ne babijja mu kitongole ekiyimiridde kyokka ne bakifuula department. Kati commissioner wa ministry yakola ng'omuwandiisi wa department erabirira ebibiina bya nakyewa. Naye bakama be tebaliiwo, teri abamanyi. Minisita tanaaba kubalonda. Kati ne bino byawandiika nti asazizaamu biki, asuspendinze waaka, si mirimu gye. Yeetumiriza ayimiridde ku mirimu gy'abalala abataliiwo. Akatongole board enkadde yaliko chair yali kati mulamuzi Justice James Kinobe. Abalala amendment bwe yateekerwawo tebaliiwo. Minisita tanaba kubanjula mu gazeti Abannayuganda babategeere. Naffe ng'ebibiina bya nakyewa tetubamanyi, tebaliiwo. Kati bw'osinziira ku teeka eryo NGO Amendment 2024 okuggyako secretary n'abaakola nabo, NGO Bureau teriiwo kubanga etteeka ligamba mu kawaayiro 16 nti Bureau baba abakugu ababeerawo ababeera ku board be bagenda okukola emirimu. Secretary ye agenda ku publicizinga ebyo bye basazeewo. Naye kati secretary yasalawo bibye ate nga si mulimu gwe. Ekirala kye ngenda kwogerako nti wabadde mubuuzo twogeragana n'ebino ebitongole. Twogeragana nabyo kubanga tukola nabyo on a daily basis. Nakati twogeragana nabyo naye tetunaba kufuna solution ku zino ensonga ze twogeddeko wano. Era tusaba bino bye baakola mu bukyamu babiveeko, batambuze emirimu ng'amateeka ga Uganda agakwata ku bibiina bya nakyewa bwe gabavunaana. Era ekitongole ekigoberera ssente FIA kyayogeddeko n'abamu ne kigamba nti kyagala kutegeera transaction. Kati ne twebuuza transaction buli mwaka twanjula mu Bureau ofunye ssente ki, ozisaasaanyiza otya, oyina abakozi bameka, era n'obawandiika ne ID numbers, national ID. Kati gavumenti eyina audit reports z'ebibiina bya nakyewa, kiki kyeyagaza bibiina bya nakyewa? Ate nga na parliament yakola amendment mu tteeka lya FIA n'ejjako ebibiina bya nakyewa kubanga transactions zaabwe tezikwatagana ne anti-money laundering oba terrorism, emirimu gya FIA. Kati FIA twagaza ki bibiina bya nakyewa? Era n'agambye nti abamawulire mukole nnyo omulimu. Gavumenti bw'eba eyogera bino ebigendererwa nga byakukyayisa abantu ebibiina bya nakyewa, mubabuuze. FIA yayogedde nti ebibiina bya nakyewa 2 birina 70 billion. mugendeyo mubabuuze bibiina ki bye boogerako ate evidence eriwa nti balina sente zino kubanga njagala kubakakasa nti teri bibiina bya nakyewa ebirina sente zenkana bwezito tebiriiwo batusibako amatu gaki
Gembuzi tulisengo.
osengo
Finally, we can conclude.
nga tumaliriza njagala okwogera ku bintu bibiri. Ekisooka Sarah teyayogeddeko ekya secretary wa NGO Bureau okubeera ng'akola emirimu egitali gigye ng'akola emirimu gya Bureau. Ekyo kimenya amateeka era saa zino we twogerera tugenda musimba mu mbuga z'amateeka abeere nga ayakauntingira okukola emirimu egitali gigye kubanga amateeka ga Uganda tegakkiriza mukozi wa gavumenti okukola emirimu egitali gigye. Ekyokubiri, twayogedde ku NGO fund. Gavumenti gyeyogerako, tuwulidde waliyo ne sovereignty bill. Gavumenti gyereeta okubeera nga eregulatinga sente ezijja mu nsi nga zivudde wabweru. Nejjukira nti gavumenti eno yeegayirira nnyo ba donors bagiwe sente bagiwole kubanga bw'otunulamu n'amabanja g'eyina. First of all, domestically, yeewoze nnyo kumwe bannansi. Kansubire mubadde mugenze mulaba waliwo zino promotions zetulaba eza government bonds, treasury bills na biki. Gavumenti egezaako okubeewolako sente. Era yeewoze nnyo sente okuva ku bannansi. Kyova olaba maaso awo oyinza okwesanga nga tebasobola na kuzibaddiza. Naye ate kyewolera nnyo ku bannansi kiri nti n'ebweru gye baali beewola kati saawa zino waliwo institutions ezimu ezitakyasobola giwola kubanga ziraba nga tesobola kuzzayo sente ezo. Kati bagenze ne mubamane lenders. Naye kati eyo gavumenti emu ebagamba nti eyagala kuteekawo NGO fund ebeere ng'esobola okuwa ebibiina by'abannakyewa sente bikole emirimu gyayo. Neyo nga yo nga n'ebintu ebiyaayo by'erina okukola tesobola kubifandinga yo nga yo. Ekintu kino ekya NGO fund si gwe guno omulundi ogusoose okubeera nga kyogerwako. Kyasooka okwogerwako mu tteeka eryayita kati eririwo erya 2014-2015 awo bwe twali tuwaya ku tteeka eryo ekintu ekyo kyalimu. Naye akakiiko akaali kakola ku tteeka lino ery'abannakyewa ne kagoba proposal eyo karizoninga nti okusooka gavumenti egamba nti eyagala okufandinga ebibiina by'abannakyewa era eyagala na badonors abalala bateeke sente mu fund eyo gavumenti ebeere nga yesobola okukola ki okudispersinga sente ezo. Naye akakiiko ne kagamba nti gavumenti banga tesobola kumiitinga obligations ezaayo nga yo esobola yotyo ogamba nti esobola okuteekawo sente ate ezigenda mu bibiina by'abannakyewa okukola emirimu gavumenti gyeyandibadde ekola naye gyetasobola kukola. Ekyokubiri, akaseera ako twali tukola campaign gye tuyita Black Monday nga campaign eyo etunula mu nguzi eyali egenda maaso mu nsi eno. Kati akakiiko ne kagamba saawa zino ebibiina by'abannakyewa bino birwaninga campaign eno. Kyebirwaningira campaign eno kwe kubeera nga tebyesiga gavumenti eno mu accountability matters oba mu kukwata ssente. Kati ebibiina by'abannakyewa ne badonors gavumenti byesuubira okuteeka ssente mu fund eno banaafuna batya obukakafu nti gavumenti eno tegenda kukwata zino ssente bubi nga bwebadde ekola ki ekwata ssente ezaayo z'edispersinga kubanga mukimanyi bulungi nti mu gavumenti mulimu ababbi bangi bagenze babba. Kati tufuna bukakafu ki nti abana abantu abali mu gavumenti tebagenda kubba zino ssente ezigenda kubeera mu fund eyo nga babadde bakola ki babba ssente ezaabwe already ze bali responsible for. Kati awo akakiiko ne kagoba proposal eyo. Naye bw'ogenda n'otunula mu proposal eno engeri gye bagireeseemu okusooka bakola kye bayita benchmarking ne bagenda ne batunula ku nsi gye bayita Ethiopia. Ethiopia balina etteeka bwe lityo, fund bwetyo. Ate etteeka eryo ligamba nti bw'oba ng'oli kibiina ky'abannakyewa ng'ofuna funding okuva mu any foreign source 80% plus, obeera ofuuse foreign organization. N'olwekyo tokkirizibwa kwogera ku bintu ebikwata ku bannansi oba ku accountability oba ku democracy oba ku human rights. Kataawo era bw'ogenda n'otunulamu ebitongole gavumenti byegenze targetinga pamiti ze basuspendinga ebibiina 10 oba n'ebyo Financial Intelligence Authority byegenze ne freezing account zaazo, byebyo ebibiina ebikola ku issues bwezityo accountability, human rights, democracy. Kati ekyo kikulaga nti gavumenti eno spirit oba ekigireetera okubeera ng'ereetawo proposal ya NGO fund yeri eya Ethiopia okubeera nga ebibiina ebiri vocal bweba nga bifuna ssente eziva bweru tebikirizibwa kukola ki kwogera ku bintu eby'abannansi. Kakati awo ne mpunzika nga ngamba mwe nga bannansi mulina okumanya nti lino etteeka n'eno proposal ya NGO fund gavumenti gy'ereeta first of all teri practical kubanga gavumenti terina ssente zisobola kuteeka mu fund eyo, n'ekyeyagala kwe kubeera nga econtrollinga ssente badonors ze baleeta babeere nga baditamininga ani gwe bawa ssente ezo. Ekyokubiri, bw'otunuuliramu proposals eziri mu regulatory impact assessment Andrew gyayogeddeko, bagamba nti dona nga tonaleeta ssente muno mu nsi eza ebibiina by'abannakyewa olina okusooka ofune accreditation, balina okusooka bakuwandiike. Oli omuntu ayagala kuyamba obeere ng'osolvinga ebizibu byo naye mugamba sooka weewandiise nange olyoke ompe ssente. Ekyokubiri bagamba nti ebibiina by'abannakyewa niyo gamba kwaba kamanyiirwe kati wembeera nga nze agenda okuwa ssente nongamba nsooka weewandiise olyoke ompe ssente obeera omanyiira era nze nga dona ngamba bugambe wayi ssente zange kanzikwate nkole ki nzitwala awalala bwe baziwa respect gye deservinga. Ekyokubiri bagamba nti ekibiina ky'abannakyewa ekinaafuna ssente okuva mu dona atali accredited ogwo guba musango era ng'ekibiina ky'abannakyewa muba musobola okugalibwawo era n'abadirectors ne babasiba. Kati awo ne kikulaga nti spirit eri behind eno proposal mbi nnyo era ffe nga bannansi tulina okugirejectinga twegatte ku bibiina by'abannakyewa tukushinge back tubeere nga tusobola okubeera nga opening up space for civil society operations. Ekirala kye mbadde njagala okwogerako etteeka eryo gavumenti eno lya benchmarkingako ne mu Ethiopia yennyini baaligoba kubanga development partners actually bateekawo pressure ne bannansi ne bateekawo pressure ne balijja era etteeka eryo terikyaliyo naye kati gavumenti eno ebenchmarkinga ku mateeka agagobebwa edda mu nsi ze ba benchmarkingako.
That brings us to the end of this news conference. We thank you for honoring the invitation and attending. If you're interested, copies of the statement are available. And if you also would like to interact with my colleagues here, you may. That's the end of this news conference. Thank you very much.